Welcome to Blue Oak NX, Mitochondrial Health and Health Span, an event held at the UCLA Mathias Botanical Gardens in Los Angeles. Please welcome Dr. Susan Perlman.
Okay, so I am not going to talk about Friedreich's ataxia, although I have been working in that my entire career, from a fellow until now, where I run our Friedreich's ataxia clinic. I've been involved in clinical trials for Friedreich's ataxia. I think we've been a site for more than half a dozen and are looking forward to more as the field develops. But Friedreich's ataxia is a mitochondrial disease, so that some of the things I'll be showing do relate to imbalance, or as the National Ataxia Foundation says, ataxia is not a foreign cab. It's a problem with balance and coordination coming from the cerebellum, which is very energy dependent. So most mitochondrial defects will affect that part of the brain. Other tissues in the body are also very energy dependent. Mitochondria produce energy, muscle, the heart. So we'll be looking at some of that. I do have some introductory slides about the mitochondrion, which I think is going to lead right into what Dr. Guo is going to be discussing, with some of the more specific disorders of aging. So where are mitochondria and what do they do? This is a picture of a cell on the right-hand side with all the subcomponents of the cell. We know the cell, we know the nucleus where the DNA and genes reside, but around that, in the body of the cell, are all these small organelles, each of which have very specific activities to maintain the health of the cell and enable the cell to do its job. So the mitochondrion was one of them. And looking at the subgroups here, we have the nucleus, which contains the genetic material. We have the mitochondria, which produce energy. We have ribosomes, which assemble the proteins. We have the endoplasmic reticulum, which is involved in protein and lipid synthesis. The Golgi apparatus, packages these things. The lysosomes break these things down. Vacuoles in the cells store water, nutrients, and waste products. Peroxisomes break down, some of these components. Centrioles help organize the microtubules, which are the internal skeleton of our cells. And plastids, like chloroplasts found in plant cells, are involved in photosynthesis. So, we think of the cell, we think of the nucleus, but there's a lot of other things in the cell that if any of these go wrong, the cell will not survive or not be able to do its job. So where do mitochondria come from? You figure, maybe there are proteins that are made and they assemble inside the cell into this very complex little organelle. But historically, they're thought to have originated from ancient bacterial cells through a process called endosymbiosis. So that primitively, way back in the day, a bacterium that they feel they have identified, it's a type of non-sulfur bacteria, became symbiotic with other cells and formed a relationship where they became the main energy production factory. And then this kind of list of things on the right just shows the similarities between the mitochondrion, this little organelle, and the bacteria that it is felt to have evolved from. And there are very good basic scientists that have been working on this for many years to try to explain this. Mitochondria have their own DNA. The cell in the nucleus has its own DNA. The DNA in the mitochondria do make the proteins that are very important for the mitochondria to produce energy. And the mitochondria are inherited from the mother, so that all of your mitochondria in every cell came from your mom. So we just had Mother's Day, thank you, Mom. But with this in mind, if somebody has a mitochondrial defect, it can only be passed on from a female, so that men can inherit bad mitochondria, but they can't pass them on. So this is one of the maternally caused disorders that we see in neurology and in other specialties as well. So what are the functions of the mitochondria? They're the powerhouses making energy. They convert the food that we take in into ATP, which powers the cellular functions, with all the things that the cell needs to do that it requires energy for. You can produce energy without the mitochondria oxygen component. It's called anaerobic production, but for a constant supply of energy, you really need the mitochondria. Think of sprinting. The muscles can generate energy to maintain a sprint. You build up lactic acid, your muscles ache because of that. But for long-term marathon running, you really need the mitochondria to keep generating those energy components. Muscle and nerve cells require more energy than some of the other components of the body, and they have the highest concentrations of mitochondria, numbering in the thousands in each cell. And these are all the functions on the right-hand part of this slide that the mitochondria helps mediate and control. Energy production, calcium balance, it has a role in the immune system, it has a role in programmed cell death, so that all the cells in our body have within their genetic programming their lifespan. The cells live for a period of time and then they die. That's programmed cell death. And the mitochondria do contribute to that phenomenon. They can regulate stem cell development, as we're developing, and our stem cells are turning into the rest of our body. They're involved in detoxification in the liver, for instance, cell growth and cell multiplication, regulating metabolism, steroid synthesis, and hormone signaling. So the mitochondria appear in all of these important activities. So if anything goes wrong with the mitochondria in a person's cells, multiple areas of dysregulation can occur. Not just the nervous system, which I kind of specialize in, or the heart, or peripheral muscle, but all of these areas could experience some problems. And a hallmark of mitochondrial disease is that it is multisystemic. So you may have somebody who presents with what appears to be a neuromuscular problem, that has led to scoliosis and foot deformities because of the muscular difficulty. So they're going to end up seeing a muscle specialist. They'll end up seeing an orthopedist. And each of them is going to look specifically. And then potentially if they develop a heart problem, the cardiologist will get involved. And this constellation of problems, which is a hallmark of Friedreich's ataxia, you can get multiple specialists with tunnel vision trying to treat the problem. And so, there's an effort, I think, to raise awareness about mitochondrial disorders of all types so that you don't have different specialists, working against each other. So these are the pathways in the mitochondrion. And I took this picture off the internet. That's the doctor who put together that little cartoon of a mitochondrion with the various pathways of how food, glucose in this case, goes in, how it is turned into energy stepwise. And on the right side, we list the different components, all of which have proteins that are created by the mitochondrion or by the cell itself and then transported into the mitochondrion. So you have the Krebs cycle proteins, you have the electron transport chain, which is the one that we're all familiar with who work with mitochondrial disorders. It's got 5 components, component 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oxidative phosphorylation is the movement of electrons along the electron transport chain to release energy, making ATP synthase. And ultimately, ATP is the energy currency used by cells in your entire body. Oxygen is necessary for the flow of electrons in the electron transport chain and the creation of the proton gradient and ultimately the production of the ATP. so that we refer to this as oxidative metabolism, aerobic respiration, as opposed to anaerobic, where oxygen is not immediately involved, but that can only sustain it for a short period of time. So these are the proteins that make up the mitochondrion. Some of them are made in the DNA that's in the mitochondria itself. Some of them are from the autosomes that are in the cellular DNA. So the mitochondria DNA contains 37 genes. They make 13 proteins that are required for energy production, as well as 22 transfer RNAs and 2 ribosomal RNAs that use the DNA signal to make those proteins. So it's a nice little group of self-sustaining production of the proteins that are involved in the basic mitochondrial function. So involving oxidative phosphorylation. So from the autosomes, in the rest of the nucleus, there are over 1,000 proteins that are produced in the nucleus that are involved in the mitochondria. They're transported into the mitochondria and are involved in filling in the rest of the activities that the mitochondria requires. Representative diseases. So there could be a defect in the mitochondrial DNA itself or in the cellular DNA affecting one of the proteins that the mitochondria depend on. So there are many types of mitochondrial diseases, and Dr. Guo is going to discuss some of them in more detail. And the exact number, 270 to over 400, over 350 identified through genetic testing. So there are a lot of diseases that can be identified now that we have the ability to do genetic testing. And these diseases can be caused by changes in either the mitochondrial DNA or the nuclear DNA, and they can affect any organ or system in the body. Some of the common mitochondrial diseases, and these relate to changes in the DNA in the mitochondria itself, mitochondrial encephalopathy, lactic acidosis, and stroke-like episodes, MELAS for short, Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, Leigh syndrome, Kearns-Sayre syndrome, and myoclonic epilepsy and ragged red fiber disease, or MRF. So, these are, terms that have come up. I've seen patients with most of these conditions. They're very rare. How common is mitochondrial disease? It's estimated that 1 in 5,000 people has a genetic mitochondrial disease. They may have, a small number of abnormal mitochondria. They may have a large number of abnormal mitochondria, and that will determine the severity of their illness. But it's common for mitochondrial diseases to be misdiagnosed due to the vast number and variety of symptoms and organs that can be involved. So the number, 1 in 5,000, may be an underestimate. So treatment of mitochondrial diseases, symptom management, medication, supplements, diet, and rehabilitation. And these are all directed at symptom management. Addressing the underlying issues on the right side, a lot of research has gone into what can we do to prop up the mitochondria so they can function better if we can't fix the genetic problem. And you see at the bottom of that list is gene therapy. It's a promising approach. Can we fix the defect in the gene? Can we put a new gene in there? But this is a few years away from practical use. Although in Friedreich's ataxia, there is gene replacement therapy for the heart involvement. They are still working on ways to replace the gene for the neurologic involvement. So you can enhance mitochondrial function. You can buffer the energy to make it more stable. Antioxidants are used. There's an approach restoring nitric oxide production, which seems to help circulation and may help some of the features of mitochondrial dysfunction. You can make more mitochondria. And there are treatments that will increase the number of mitochondria. Of course, you're increasing the number of mitochondria that may be defective, but at least there's more of them. So potentially they can keep up with energy production. There's a nucleoside bypass therapy trying to bypass the metabolic block in DNA synthesis, if that's the mechanism. And liver and stem cell transplants for those tissues may also be able to replace damaged cells with healthy ones. So there's been a lot of very creative research in understanding and manipulating mitochondrial problems. So possible disease-modifying therapies, and I spelled them out in a little more detail. So some mitochondrial treatments aim to enhance electron transport chain functioning, either by boosting the components, enhancing electron transfer, increasing electron transfer substrate availability. CoQ10, idebenone, riboflavin, have been discussed and tried in this mechanism, dichloroacetate and thiamine. Creatine combines the phosphate in the mitochondria to form phosphocreatine that serves as a source of high energy phosphate released during anaerobic metabolism. Therefore, it could be an intracellular buffer to work around the mitochondrial defect that reduces energy production. During oxidative phosphorylation, a small part of the oxygen is partially reduced and converted to reactive oxygen species, which can be toxic if they occur in high amounts. So they are important for signaling you need some, but too many reactive oxygen species could be toxic to the cell. Antioxidants have been used, and the antioxidants, vitamins, vitamin C, vitamin E, well known. Carotenoids, beta-carotene is a precursor to vitamin A and acts as an antioxidant. Polyphenols, these are found in many plant-based foods and have strong antioxidant properties. Think of, if you eat a carload of, purple grapes, you might get enough polyphenol antioxidant capability to make a difference. So, attempting to enhance your diet with fruits, vegetables that have antioxidant properties is, appealing because it's natural, but it may not be enough. Flavonoids, epicatechin. Other examples, selenium, glutathione, artichokes, are a source of antioxidants. So I think most of us know that much of anti-aging and health preservation and treatment of mitochondrial diseases does revolve around antioxidants. I think most of my patients are on vitamin E, and many have added CoQ10 to that. So there's growing evidence about this nitric oxide deficiency that may occur, and if you could improve it, you might be able to smooth out mitochondrial function. For instance, in MELAS, the use of arginine and citrulline as nitric oxide precursors seem to restore nitric oxide production. So this is one area of research that they have pursued for that particular disorder. FDA-approved treatments. There are two. One is definitely FDA-approved. It's been available for close to 2 years, Skyclarys, or omaveloxolone. It's the first drug approved by the FDA specifically for a mitochondrial disease, and it was approved specifically for Friedreich's ataxia. It activates the NRF2 pathway, which is a pathway that when the mitochondrion feels oxidative stress from a number of causes, it activates the NRF2 pathway, which enables the mitochondrion to deal with oxidative stress. In Friedreich's, the NRF2 pathway is underactive. Skyclarys activates it and has had symptomatic and potentially disease-modifying benefits for Friedreich's. The company that now owns Skyclarys is going to look at its application for other disorders, which I think Dr. Guo will be discussing. But right now you can only get it if you have a genetic diagnosis of Friedreich's. Idebenone is an older drug that I think was originally investigated for Alzheimer's disease, as I remember, many years ago. It is a shortened form of CoQ10 that is felt to get into the nervous system better than regular CoQ10. It has been around for a while, and seems to show promise in treating Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, and has been evaluated for other conditions, including Friedreich's, where it didn't really meet statistically significant endpoints. Although you can get it without a prescription, and many patients with Friedreich's are still taking idebenone. So mitochondrial dysfunction accompanies other degenerative disorders. And this was an article, an abstract from that article discussing that. And this is a chart from that article looking at Huntington's disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, the defects in those 5 components of the electron transport chain, which of those are known to be altered in these disorders, mitochondrial dysfunction contributing to the progression of those 4 diseases. So active trials, which trials are on clinicaltrials.gov for mitochondrial disease? If you search, interventional trials for mitochondrial disease, active trials, there's 97 studies listed with another 409 that are not active, and those are probably trials that failed. But you can still find them, and they may have some information about, what they did learn and why they didn't reach, significance. So I highlighted the studies, the 97 trials that, are still active, and I noted the ones that have more than one trial. And that's the little number to the right of the, so idebenone has 2 active trials. Epicatechin, has 1 active trial, but over 20,000 citations in PubMed, interestingly enough. Omaveloxolone, has 2 active trials. They're testing it in children now. They got approved for adults with Friedreich's, but now they're looking at children. And MitoQ, which is on the left, I think has the most. I think there's 8 active trials of MitoQ, which is coenzyme Q10 with a moiety attached to it that drags it into the cells and into the mitochondrion. So regular CoQ10, you get a certain amount that wanders its way into cells and mitochondria. MitoQ, it's, I think, 1,000 times greater. But once it gets in there, it can scoop up free radicals, but it can't participate in energy production because the Q part, the CoQ10 part, has this extra piece attached to it which doesn't allow it to participate. So good side, but maybe a side that handicaps what it can do. These are some useful websites for patients and practitioners. And I think the one at the bottom is, the newest one over the last few years, the Ataxia Global Initiative, looking at all disorders that affect the cerebellum, including mitochondrial disorders, on an international basis, trying to join together everybody doing research and clinical research in these very rare disorders so that, we'll be able to get enough patients and families participating in trials to get more approved drugs. And this is my research team, the donors that have been, helping to, promote our clinical research, and obviously the patients and families that, have been willing to work with us over all these years and share their hopes and ideas. So thank you.
Any questions? Thank you. You can learn more at www.blueoaknx.com.